families aren't going to unsee what they saw in 2020. They're not going to forget how powerless they felt. They want to feel powerful again. They want to have control over the upbringing of their children, and school choice and homeschooling. It's the best way to move forward to allow for that to happen.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, educator in Los Angeles, bringing viewpoint diversity to the mainstream and a whole bunch of topics. And the topic for today is going to be the education department, more specifically the Department of Education. And when I put it out there on my social media about who to talk to, Corey DeAngelis came up a lot. And he's a friend of the show, been on here. I think we did an Instagram Live, then he's been on the show. Tons of credentials and everything. He is the voice out there, the most prominent voice when it comes to school choice. Love having him on, love picking his brain. He's a brilliant guy who has a lot to say and has a lot of passion about the education system, which is something that obviously resonates with me a lot. So Corey, it's great to see you, man. I'm ready to just get into the Trump administration and what you see in the future. And then also I have a lot of questions about the Department of Education and what it would realistically look like if it would be eliminated. Also, elements of what it does, how could it be reformed, and things along those lines. So I really appreciate you giving me your time. I know you're a busy guy, so coming on here after we just did one a couple months ago, it really means a lot. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. So the Department of Education, I see a lot online and there's a lot of talk, even in cable news and everything, about eliminating the Department of Education. And Trump has talked about that. Other people kind of around him have talked about that. Do you think that that's a realistic thing? He just brought in McMahon to be the Secretary of Education. With Linda.
Let's get ready to rumble. Yeah. I think it's a desirable thing to do. It's an unconstitutional waste of time and money. The word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. Right. It's arguably, therefore, a violation of the 10th Amendment that should be reserved of a power to the states. And each individual state already does have a Department of Education. So we don't need an additional Department of Education look, we had education before 1979 when it was created. It was created actually by Jimmy Carter as a payoff to the teachers union, the NEA, the National Education Association, who, by the way, Becky Pringle, their president, started crying figuratively on Twitter, now X, after the announcement of Linda McMahon as the Secretary of Education. She probably would have had the same response to whoever Trump picked for that role. But look, it spent about $2 trillion since the inception of the department. And the outcomes haven't gotten any better. In some cases, they've gotten worse. We now spend about $20,000 per student per year in the government-run school system. And look, if you'd abolish the department, that money wouldn't just evaporate. We'd send it back to the states. Trump continuously on the campaign trail didn't just say he would just snap his fingers and abolish the department. He said, let's send education back to the states. And what he's referring to, in my view, is that same money that we're already spending would be block granted back to the states to spend as they see fit. You'd have more local control that way. And you'd want to have to spend as much money on useless bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who don't understand the local needs of their constituents.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. So some of the questions I had about this, and I'm going to just run them by you, is would the Department of Education lead to some sort of cohesion, some sort of idea that the state standards, and every state has its own state standards, wouldn't get too far apart from one another, where we're how if you only watch Fox News and your neighbor only watches MSNBC, you have two totally different paradigms of what's true and going on. Does the Department of Education give some level of cohesion, and without it that could go away, and then we could have the citizens be almost more divided with the kind of information they've gotten in their schools?
I mean, maybe it gives us a sense of cohesion of something that we can agree on doesn't improve educational outcomes, but no, it doesn't provide some this fairy tale model of a democratically cohesive society. We don't have that today, and we have the Department of Education. And by the way, we have 90% of kids are in government-run schools today, and we still are in a divided society when it comes to political viewpoints. I mean, look at, in Chicago public schools, for example, that's going to look a lot different than the public schools in my home state of Texas. And so we already have this division with the Department of Education. So I don't think getting rid of it is going to make things any worse. If anything, again, that money could go back to the states. You can spend it as you see fit. And I also want to clarify that when people are talking about abolishing the department, they may not actually be talking about getting rid of everything that the department does today. There have been discussions about moving things to other agencies if it's actually necessary. So you might have the Office of Civil Rights under the Department of Education right now. That could go under the Department of Justice. If you still want to have student loans, you can have that go under the Department of Treasury, and so on and so forth. So when people are thinking about this doomsday scenario of the Department of Education going away, I don't think it would actually be as seismic of a shift as people actually are thinking right now.
Yeah, I think that's important to bring up, because that's what people like assume. I mean, I talked to someone who was like a really staunch, pro-choice advocate. This is maybe like 10 years ago. And they said, if Roe v. Wade goes away, then abortion will be illegal across the country. It's like, you are like an activist and you don't even know what the ramifications are.
Exactly.
And I see a lot of that going on right now with this, is that the Department of Education goes away, then all of these special needs kids aren't going to get the education and the support that they need. And
no, they might get more money. They might get more money per student because you're not spending it on 4,400 useless bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. That money should go back to the people in the states. They can spend it on their special needs students as they see fit. And so you could actually increase per student funding in this way.
Yeah. So just, as you said, and you're spot on. I teach government, and that if it's not mentioned in the Constitution explicitly, then it's left up to the states. And that's very clear. That's the case with education. And then for most of the history of this country, it was not there. What about things like Title I, Title IX, like the civil rights, the gender equality, like that kind of stuff? Like where would that go if the department got abolished?
So I think it's more likely than the department being abolished that these will be the kind of tweaks that we see going forward. So we haven't talked about this yet on the podcast, but it does require a supermajority in the Senate to abolish a department because it was created by Congress. You're going to need Congress to get rid of it. So a lot of people have asked me, like, Trump's saying that he's going to abolish the department, and they were thinking about putting Betsy DeVos in the cabinet position again. People were saying, well, why didn't she do it the first time? Well, the reality is she didn't have the power to snap her fingers and say, okay, we're just going to get rid of it tomorrow. I joked on Twitter about it myself, saying, if you hired me as the Department of Education chair, secretary, you'd check the box for getting a libertarian in the cabinet, and you'd also get rid of the department because I'd fire myself on the first day. It was more of it was halfway in jest, because I wouldn't be able to just snap my fingers and get rid of it. You'd need 60 votes in the Senate, which
to get over the filibuster.
To overcome the filibuster. And there are 53 Republicans in the Senate. Even if you can get them all on board, you need 7 Democrats who are owned by the teachers unions to come along with it. I don't think that's going to happen unless there was some grand bargain, increasing spending in other ways in order to get a deal done with the Democrats. But I don't know if that is actually going to happen. What's more likely is that things will get shuffled around. You could reduce the influence of the department. You can use executive orders. You could make these Title IX changes that we saw with Betsy DeVos the first time around. And so this could be a way to protect women's sports again, so we don't blur the lines of male and female, where you have females competing against males all across the country. I think that's more realistically what'll happen, which can be transformative to individuals, but isn't really as seismic of a shift of getting rid of the department altogether. I also think another shift could be, instead of having to overcome a filibuster, you can use a straight majority to influence things through the budget reconciliation process in Congress. And so that only requires a simple majority, 50 votes, plus the vice president would break a tie. And so I think that's more likely to happen. You can shift funding that way. Maybe you reduce funding in certain areas. Trump has talked about reducing funding for diversity, equity, inclusion. priorities. So that's what I think is more likely to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of glazed over that. So thank you for bringing that up. This is kind of like a devolution, like de-evolution kind of thing, giving more power up to states, like that happened under Reagan. It seems like that seems to be a lot of what Trump's advocating for. How many people work at the Department of Education? Did you say 4,000?
I think it's about 4,400 people. What do they do? But beats me. I don't think they do a bunch of anything, and they're getting paid. I heard from someone on the inside who worked at the department under DeVos was telling me that they had someone that was working in one of the departments, and all they did all year was create like one PowerPoint slide. It's paper pushers who have been there for a long time. They expect to retire there. They expect to get a bloated pension, and quite frankly, I think a lot of them could go.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So another thing that's covered under the Department of Education is the federal student loan program, right? So if is that another thing? Is this like I was wondering what it would be that the Department of Education, which no one seemed to care a whole lot about, maybe you and I did, but now it's like kind of on the forefront of the news all the time. Is it the call to change things, the calls to abolish it, but essentially to change things? Is it the Title IX and the trans sports stuff? And is it the student loan forgiveness? Like, what is that? Is that what's kind of leading this charge, you think? Is it, or is it just the bad outcomes?
I think it's the bad outcomes. It's the waste of money. So taxpayers aren't happy about it. And the Department of Education was, again, a payoff to the teachers union, which is a money laundering operation to the Democrat Party. You look at Becky Pringle, who complained about Linda McMahon as the pick as education secretary. Well, the NEA has a federal charter, which is the only union in the country that has a federal charter, has the backing of Congress. It makes zero sense. It got it in 1906, so it's been around for well over 100 years. And there was a bill in Congress this year by Republicans in the House to get rid of that federal charter. There wasn't as much of a push for that bill to get across the finish line. I don't even think it made it out of committee. But now with the trifecta, with Trump winning the presidency, the Republicans taking over the Senate and maintaining control of the House, I think there might be a renewed push to get rid of that federal charter for the NEA. Why do they get special privileges? The only union in the country that has a federal charter. They should get rid of it. And I think that's why Becky's freaking out. I think she's also freaking out because school choice is a threat to the teachers union too. And there's another bill called the Educational Choice for Children Act. It passed out of committee about a month ago, the first nationwide school choice bill to ever pass out of a congressional committee, just did so recently. And Linda McMahon's a supporter of school choice. Trump campaigned consistently, not only on abolishing the department, but also providing school choice to every family in America. He talked about that during his first term too, but he didn't have as much momentum when he first became president. There wasn't the COVID school closures. There wasn't the parent revolution that unfolded post remote learning. And so there's going to be a renewed push. There's a trifecta going into 2025, and school choice is going to be one of the top things on the menu of options available before Congress and before the president. He actually went on Fox and Friends about a month ago. The host had brought up that the bill passed out of committee, and Trump said that he would sign the bill. So we now have confirmation that a specific bill, not just some broad concept of school choice, a specific bill, which is a federal tax credit, people getting more of their own money back to spend as they see fit on K-12 education expenses, would expand school choice to families, not only in red states that already have some form of school choice, but also would provide educational opportunities to families who are living in blue states right now, like California and New York, that don't have any private school scholarship programs. This federal initiative would allow school choice to come to blue states too. So I think that's why it's also very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think people just get lost in the idea of when you go after public schools, in any kind of way. It's just like, they think of the impoverished kids whose parents aren't involved and aren't going to be advocating for, bringing them to a better school and all this kind of stuff. They think about those kids that are lost, that the school is their one safe havens. The place, I taught in East LA, where the only place, like, I don't know, almost half the kids, the only food they got was at school. The parent teacher conference night was a lonely night, like that kind of stuff. And they're thinking like, you're going after these kids and you're taking resources away from them. I mean, I see the way that people like Pringle, I forget Randy Weingarten, like they go after you so viciously. And something I explain to my students is like, it's the flip side of empathy. It's the mother bear thing. And they see you as attacking the vulnerable. That's the way they see you, Corey. They see you as attacking the vulnerable. You don't think so?
No, that's not what they see me as. They see me as attacking their salaries. Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle both make over $500,000 a year, and they don't see this as protecting the children. They see this as protecting their monopoly on the minds of those children. They see a tug of war between them and the parents, and they think they should have more of a say over those parents' children, and they, more importantly, want a monopoly on that funding associated with those kids. Because if those kids get a choice and those parents can send their kids to a private school or to homeschool them and get some of the funding to follow the student that they're paying in taxes already, Randy Weingarten, Becky Pringle would not like that, because that would mean the funding would follow the kid away from their unionized failure factories like in Chicago, where, by the way, the teachers union boss in Chicago, Stacey Davis Gates, she called school choice racist last year. We just found out she sends her kid to a private school while they spend $30,000 per kid per year in the government-run schools in Chicago. She knows they're failing. She's sending her own kids somewhere else. We just want school choice advocates like myself to allow other families to be able to afford private school options too. But the problem is that threatens the teachers union monopoly. They want to keep that money for not educating your children. In Chicago, they have about 50 schools that have 0% math proficiency rates. Not a single kid proficient in math in tons of schools in cities like Chicago, where they're spending tons of money. It's not a money issue. Their solution is to throw more money at the problem. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And guess what? Stacey Davis Gates, her kid goes to a private school that costs half of that amount, $15,000 in tuition each year. Again, it's not a money issue. It's an incentive issue. And I'm not attacking the teachers here. The teachers in the system are getting screwed as well, that are doing a good job. The money goes into the system, but it doesn't make its way into the classroom. It doesn't go towards teacher salaries. It goes towards administrative bloat. Think about it. Since 2000, we have data nationally on this question. The number of students since 2000 has increased by about 5%, not that much. The number of teachers about twice that rate, by about 10%. But the number of administrators in the system has increased by about 95%. It has become more of a jobs program for administrators than an education initiative for kids. And people like Randy and Becky make the teachers look bad because they politicize education. You look at Randy's Twitter account, all she's doing is railing against Republicans, who there's a lot of conservatives who are teachers too, and they don't feel represented by union leadership. Randy Weingarten's union in 2022, last election cycle, we have data from Open Secrets, 99.97% of their campaign contributions went to Democrats. Are 99% of teachers Democrats? No.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, it's absolutely just completely melded together with the Democratic Party. I guess I just try to look at, like, I don't know, like, give people the benefit of the doubt and like think like, oh, they have good intentions and stuff. By no means do I think that you're the same.
I used to be the same way, Will. I used to be the same way. I don't like questioning people's motivations, and I like to I used to like to pretend that everybody had good intentions, but the reality is they don't. And at the end of the day, you almost can't blame the union bosses as much as you can blame the system that they're operating in. Yeah. And so, like, the incentives are baked into that system. If you had a monopoly, you'd probably fight to keep it too. That's just rational human behavior and self-interest. So it doesn't actually mean they're necessarily evil. They're self-interested, but the government gives them this geographic monopoly where you live here. You have to go to school based on where you live. You're assigned there. That creates monopoly power. Compulsory funding through the tax system creates more monopoly power. And that's the status quo. You have that bias built in too. And school choice seems like a threat to them, right? Because now all of a sudden they don't have that same power. But at the end of the day, if they don't have that power in the relationship and parents get some of that power, then the system will have an incentive to listen to those parents. And what we've seen all across the country is that the public schools actually get better when families have choices, because the public schools, instead of labeling parents as a domestic terrorist like we saw during the COVID era because they were complaining about critical race theory, the FBI actually created a threat tag specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings. Instead of treating parents as an enemy, and not all school boards do this, but some of them do, they get drunk on power. They'll start to treat families as customers and say, hey, maybe if I irritate them, maybe if I focus on politically divisive topics as opposed to the basics, maybe those parents might walk away, take the money with them. I don't want to lose any of that funding, so let's treat them as partners in the relationship.
Yeah, I think, changing the incentive structure is really important. I think as long as whoever, Linda McMahon or the Trump administration, whoever, brings in, like, as long as they're kind of looking at all of these things and advocating for the kids, that's really what it comes down to. And I think that most people, that's why I probably gave, that kind of slack to Randy and Becky's, like, is as long as people are advocating for, like, these kids who are neurodivergent or they have like severe, physical handicaps or whatever it might be, whoever these for these kids, like, make sure that they get what they need. As long as there's advocates for them within the department and working it out, I think we'll be okay.
I mean, well, if you had any second thoughts about the intentions of Randy Weingart and Becky Pringle, that should have all been thrown out the window during the COVID era when they held children's education hostage to secure billions of dollars in ransom payments from the taxpayer with the so-called COVID relief funding. They got $190 billion since March of 2020. And they didn't spend it on opening the schools. In Chicago since 2019, they've increased staffing by about 10%, while they decreased student enrollment by about 10 or 20%. And what other industry do you increase your staff while you're bleeding customers? And in Chicago, they were also tweeting out, they deleted it, but in 2020, at the end of the year, they said, quote, the push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. I mean, who does that? No other profession did that. In Chicago, they created a interpretive dance video to protest going. They had their board member vacationing in Puerto Rico while railing against going back to work. Their hypocrisy was on full display. And grocery store workers didn't do this. The private school employees didn't do this. Private schools were open basically everywhere. There were some that did the remote thing, but by and large, the private schools, especially the Catholic schools, were open much faster than the government-run schools. And yeah, you could say, oh, they were concerned about safety, but not when they're going and vacationing, not when they're going to the grocery store. They're not all that concerned about safety. They use safety as an excuse not to go back to work, but it was more nefarious than that, Will. It wasn't just that they wanted to stay home. It was that they knew if they kept the schools closed, they could use that as leverage at the bargaining table to get more money. And they might have said, oh, it's all for the greater good, that we're going to keep the schools closed because we really need these resources. We need the billions of dollars for all these other goodies that we wanted before. So they may have felt that they were doing the right thing, but from an honest observer, a third party, them being the only people doing this, and how it hurt kids academically, mentally, even physically. Obesity rates were on the rise. Teen suicides were on the rise. That's that's pretty nefarious to me.
For sure. Is it an echo chamber thing? Like, is everyone in the department, is it all kind of now aligned with like being on the left of politics, and they don't have enough people like highlighting their blind spots the way that you are now, or challenging them? Is that what it is? Or is the department bipartisan?
I think more of the issue is with the individual schools. It's the department too. So abolishing the department isn't going to fix everything, even though I think it's a step in the right direction. You still have the problems of monopolies, and you still have the problem of the pipeline going into the K through 12 public school system. If you have people who are more so on the left infiltrating the school system, then you're just going to have a leftward bias politically in the public schools. I recently exposed a couple of public school teachers in the Los Angeles area in California's Moreno Valley Unified, and it was Chino Valley Unified. Two separate teachers went on anti-Trump rants. One was on election day. The other one was the day after the election. And it was on a borderline abusive, the recordings that I shared. They're both on leave now, by the way, but imagine if these kids didn't record this, it would have been a he said, she said situation. The teachers would have still been in the classroom. But as more of a libertarian myself, I think the problem isn't with I think the bigger problem is who gets to decide what that curriculum looks like, what the teaching looks like, the pedagogy, because it can go, you can theorize that it could go the other way. I never see examples of it going too far to the right. I don't see, people complaining of public school teachers in California, for example, saying that, when Joe Biden won, I didn't see these kind of meltdowns happen in class from Trump supporting teachers. I don't know if that's because there's just not as many Trump supporting teachers, or maybe they're just not acting the same way, or maybe they're just, I don't know what it is. But if that were the case, I would still fight for the right for parents to have a voucher to go somewhere else to a school that's aligned. And I would still say, hey, that crossed the line. It should not be biased one way or the other. And that's a real hard thing to do, to be honest. With schools, I don't know if they can be completely neutral. I think you should strive for that, but I think the solution has to be from the bottom up, not only from the top down. You have to let people vote with their feet, because you're never going to get out of the one size fits all problem where parents are going to disagree about how they want to raise their kids. Even when you stick to things simple as the basics, you had the Common Core stuff, right? People were fighting about how to teach math. So like, even if we can agree that we should focus on the basics, you're going to have disagreements. And I think parents need to be the ones in the driver's seat determining for their own kids what's best, because it's almost like a Hayekian problem too. We have a knowledge problem where I don't know what the best curriculum is. I'll admit that. I don't think anybody knows what the best curriculum is for every single kid. I don't know if they know what the best way for every single kid to learn and be interested in something, because we're different. It's okay to be different. Kids have different abilities, and they have unique backgrounds and perspectives and interests. And so it needs to be bottom up, not just top down.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. That's why I love the idea of school choice. And I was like, attracted to what you were doing, early on, is because, there's stuff. I have friends that teach in Florida, and there's some goofy stuff about, books getting banned, that like you have to put a list out. And if one parent or one advocacy group like raises a red flag, then you have to like pull that off the shelf. And like, so if that's kind of stuff's happening at your school, just to be like, to have the freedom to go, all right, I don't want to do that. I want my kid to be able to read, these books that might have some controversial stuff in it. Then that's your choice. I mean, you are in charge of your kids and raising your kids and doing that the way that you want to do it. And it also leads to homeschooling and all the homeschool options that are out there as well. And I think that there's a growth in that. That's where I shifted from being a classroom teacher into serving homeschool families, because I was looking at where are they going to go? And then now there's like more of a momentum on this. I think that what we saw with compulsory schools, curious your thoughts on this, is you give up the responsibility for essentially raising your kid in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So what Jordan Peterson says is, you advocate responsibility, then you welcome tyranny. So you say like, well, I don't want to raise my kids. I don't want to teach them how to read or write or do all that stuff. I just, need a daycare. I got to work, could be really legitimate reasons. But in doing that, then they're going to teach your kid the way that they want and the way that suits them. And so I think that one beautiful thing that could come out of this seems like we're starting to have, hopefully, fingers crossed, some sort of revolution in education in this country would be like putting more back on the parents to pay attention. Because if you just have to send your kid to one school, then it's like, well, I don't really have options. But now that you do, then you can, maybe you're incentivized now to look at these things. And maybe you're going to like, all right, well, what is best for my kid? Start to bring the power back to the parents, which is really what we want, but the incentives have to be there. We always follow incentives. So that's actually something that makes me really optimistic about the future. Do you see the same thing, that maybe more parents will maybe get a little bit more involved and start thinking about it instead of just being on autopilot of they go to the local school?
Yeah, I think about it the same way, Will. I have a viral tweet from years ago that always makes the rounds every once in a while. And it's something along the lines of, I said something like, homeschooling is an experiment. Factory model schooling is the experiment. And families have been educating their kids at home for thousands of years. And the factory model schooling experiment has failed, basically. And I see it the same way when it comes to schooling, almost an extension of parenting. Look, when you're homeschooling your kid, you're raising your own kid, right? But when you send your kid to the public school, you're basically outsourcing that process for 7 hours or so a day for 13 years of their lives, for 180 days out of the school year. And they're not fully raising your kids, but you're outsourcing it to a place based on where you live, with people who might vehemently disagree with how you want to raise your children, and it might be at odds with what you're trying to accomplish in the home. One of the reasons I argue for school choice is that at least you can kind of choose your community that you want your child to be raised in or to be educated in. And so if you can choose a school that's aligned with your religious values, or with that's not leaning into politics too much, then that is an incremental step in the right direction. That's what I see school choice as. We now have something called education savings accounts, which this is funding that follows the students like school choice, but you can also use it for homeschooling. So you can completely select how your child is raised and have a form of school choice where the money's following the child. But you can also use it for micro-schooling, homeschool co-ops, which are other options. Maybe you're working, maybe you can't make pure homeschooling work out 100% of the time. And we saw this happen when the government schools closed in 2020 and didn't open for a long time in many states, where they were calling them pandemic pods. And in San Francisco, I remember seeing a Facebook group. It was a private group, but within like a week or two after the school closures, they had like 40,000 people already signed up in this private Facebook group. It's a weird lesson. It's an interesting lesson in spontaneous order. The libertarians should be excited about this, because when the government doesn't provide something that you need, through voluntary activity, people will start to figure things out. And we saw that with the pandemic pods, which I would call micro schools, kind of the re-envisioned one-room schoolhouse. What people were doing were getting 5 to 10 children together in a household to economize on the process of homeschooling. Yeah. Well, guess what? In Arizona, they were already doing this before COVID. They have something called Prenda micro schools. And these are miniature schools, usually 5 to 10 children getting together in a household. And people were using their education savings account funding, because they've had this in Arizona for over a decade already. And they were using this funding to pay for the micro school tuition. And so when COVID kind of popped off and the NEA was freaking out because public schools lost over 1 million kids during the COVID era, that means they lost some funding associated with those kids. The nation's largest teachers union put out an opposition research sheet. It was internal. They didn't mean for it to go public. A school choice advocate got wind of it and sent it to the Wall Street Journal. And they did an opposition research sheet, basically a political hit job, on Kelly Smith, who is the founder of Prenda Micro Schools. And it's because they saw that they were just increasing their enrollment so quickly. It was such a shakeup to the system. It threatened the behemoth that is the National Education Association. And the Wall Street Journal headline the next day was the teachers union's tiny little enemy. They even had a picture to go along with the article. It had a big elephant, which represented the NEA, afraid, on tippy toes, putting its hands up, afraid of a little ant, which represented the Prenda Micro Schools. Yeah. So I think there is going to be a shakeup very soon, mostly because, and this is why we've seen school choice blossom as well. I mean, when the government schools opened post-COVID, some of them took longer than others. People thought that the homeschool revolution was going to go away. People thought that school choice bills were going to stop passing. And what do you have here? You have a president, Trump, who campaigned on the issue. Yeah. Every single rally talking about school choice. You have bills being filed in my home state of Texas. They have the votes this year for universal school choice in my home state. That'll increase the number of kids with school choice nationwide by 10% because Texas has so many kids. And it's still on the march. And so it's not just because the schools were closed. It's what was revealed when the schools were closed. People saw that the curriculum wasn't aligned with their values. Some people thought things were fine and they get to continue choosing their public school. But some people, the genie's out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in. Although the schools are open, the problems are still there. As Milton Friedman famously said, it's not about getting the right people into office. The way that you truly change things is by creating a climate of opinion where it becomes politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing. I think that's why Josh Shapiro started to support school choice back in 2022. He's the governor of Pennsylvania, and he was up in the polls. His opponent, Doug Mastriano, who was Trump-backed, started calling Josh Shapiro a hypocrite on school choice because Josh Shapiro went to private school, sent his kids to private school. Right before the election, he included private school choice in his platform, which the unions weren't happy about. Everybody thought that Kamala Harris was going to choose Josh Shapiro as her running mate. He was in a must-win swing state. He's pretty popular in Pennsylvania. He might have delivered Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris. Who knows? But he would have done better than Tim Walz. But Kamala didn't pick him, and everybody was scratching their heads. There's a couple reasons, but one of the reasons is because the teachers' unions were never going to let that happen because Kamala Harris was owned by the teachers' unions. She was in bed with the teachers' unions, and Josh Shapiro was opposed by the NEA and the AFT because of his support. He even went on Fox News last year reiterating his support for school choice. He never actually got it across the finish line in Pennsylvania. He kind of danced around the issue, but that is a world of change from just a few years ago when Democrats were seeing it as the bigger story is whether Josh Shapiro got it done or not. Josh Shapiro felt compelled to publicly support school choice, which is usually a Republican issue. That tells you the political winds are shifting towards our side. And when the parents come and hold the politicians accountable, which is what we saw, Trump won the parent vote by 9 points. That represented a 15-point shift towards the right from parents since 2020. He also won the Catholic vote by 18 points, according to exit polling, which Catholics are big supporters of school choice. A lot of the private schools happen to be Catholic schools. We can get into the history of that on another episode. But because the political winds are shifting, because we have a new union in town, one for the kids, the parents making their voices heard, things are going to look a lot better for the future of education freedom. We're not done yet. We're only getting started. And while I'm optimistic at the federal level, we got to keep the fire burning at the state level as well.
Yeah, I love it, man. Thank you so much. I always appreciate you coming on and following your work. And I'm optimistic too. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I just know that something needs to go. Something needs to change. And so, maybe it's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. But I think it's time to make a change. It's time to try something new. And the stakes are just too great, and the data is all in, and we'll see what happens. But I hope that you're involved, man. I really do. I hope that you're involved in all this going on. I hope they tap into your expertise and your opinion on things, because I think you'd be a great ally for them. So thank you so much, Corey DeAngelis. Where can people find you? Twitter, keep up with your work and things like that.
Yeah, you can follow me on X. It's at DeAngelis Corey. I'm a senior fellow at the American Culture Project. You can also buy my book. It was endorsed by Trump recently, and Vivek Ramaswamy endorsed it as well. He's heading DOGE now, the Department of Government Efficiency. And Ted Cruz from my home state of Texas also endorsed it. He said you can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book. It's The Parent Revolution. You can find it basically anywhere, but it's on Amazon. It's on sale right now too.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Thank you so much, Corey. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys. Bye-bye.